Hi guys and welcome to my channel. My name is Tina and my aim is to improve your drawings just like others have done for me when I just started out. So last week I showed you how to create black fur with pastel and I promised I would be uploading a video where I demonstrate this in an actual piece. In case you haven't seen that previous one, I'll make sure it pops somewhere on your screen so you can go and watch that first. Now let's get this puppy started. Since this tutorial isn't about the background, I also didn't include the process. I think I'll make a small series on backgrounds in the future just because they are so much fun to do, especially with a medium like pastel where you can cover it so fast. As always, I'm going to be working on pastel mat from Clairefontaine and using a mix of soft pastels from Unison and Rembrandt for my underlayers, and for the details I'm using pastel pencils from Faber-Castell, Caran d'Ache and Stabilo. I first start by blocking in my underlayer, for which I use a black Unison soft pastel. In this tutorial it doesn't really matter if you don't use the exact same brands as I do. You could just as well use pan pastel or soft pastels from Rembrandt. The point here is that you get more of an overall sense for when and how to build your colors. In comparison to last week's tutorial, you will notice two big differences. The first, I don't do my underpainting for the entire subject. That is because if I were to do that, I would have to be careful where to rest my hand and arm for the rest of the piece. Now you could work around that by laying some glassine underneath your hand. It depends on your taste and I just like to work from left to right, top to bottom. The second thing you'll notice is that I leave spaces in between of the black. Last week's video depicted a piece of fur that had a few darker and a few lighter areas, but not as light as this one. So last week we could just add an underlayer entirely made up of black. This time we need to change it up a bit. Wherever you want or need a big highlight, it's best not to lay black immediately underneath that. Once you have black under there, you can never get it as highlighted as without it. So we just blend it out like this, blending the dark pigment out onto the blank areas, which creates a lighter shade of black. This is much more suited for the highlighted areas than had I just put black all over. Once I've done this, I go over the black again, but this time I used some black from Cretacolor. You can't really see it, but that's just because I'm using the pieces of the lead itself. It broke when I tried sharpening it, and as we all know, these pencils are expensive, so I tried to get the most of it. Because it's black fur, you can't really see it well, but I'm actually already making fur markings. You can use black from whichever brand you like, but I personally fell in love with the black from Cretacolor. It is really the darkest black I've ever seen. I blend it out again. You could leave it as is, but I just like a softer look. If you choose to blend it, don't be afraid that your highlighted area will become too dark. It's still light enough. For my second layer, I'll be using some dark blue, switching it up with lighter and darker purple. These are ideal colors for building up highlights. Normally we work from dark to light, but here it makes sense to layer the dark purple on top. We just want to mute that brightness a little bit. Never forget that pastel is one of the most forgiving mediums you can work with, so use that to your advantage. I found that it was a little bit too purpley. No problem, I can just add a bit more of black strokes on top. And then for my final hairs on that side, I just wanted to add a little bit of warm grey where the sun hits the areas, creating the highlights. Moving over onto the right side. It's exactly the same process as on the left side, we just repeat everything, so I sped this part up. So starting with our base layer, blending it out and going back on top with all of our pencils. Now as always, I'm going to list the materials I've used in the description, but you don't need the exact same pencils or soft pastels I've used. If you manage to use similar tones, your end piece will look great as well. Starting on the eyes, this piece is an A4 size. If it were bigger, I would first do my underlayer in soft pastel, but for this size it's much better to just start with the pencils immediately. I start by contouring, and since this puppy has really dark eyelids, I already make this stand out. This one has got some really dark brown eyes, so I match the color, although it almost looks black. Just be careful when blending in such small spaces not to go over the edge. I do this with my finger, but maybe a cotton tip or blending stump would be better. I just keep a small white space between the eye and the fur just to make the blending a little easier. I then add the white for the highlight in the eye. I love how with pastel you can just layer white on top of any other color and you can clearly see the white. I add in a few more colors in the eye. Just look at your reference photo for this. To fill in the white space, I added black for an underlayer, and since it's a slightly lighter area, I used a mix of light purple, warm grays, the dark blue, and finally the black on top again. Note that with both eyes, it's important to make a lighter stripe underneath the eyelid, to make sure it looks more 3D instead of flat. Moving on to the muzzle, I first block the whole thing in again and then blend it out. Then I first add the darkest areas, such as above the nose and where the mouth is shaped. For the first layer of fur here, I'm using dark blue over the entire muzzle. There aren't any highlighted areas here, so we don't need to add any lighter colors. And adding the blue here really makes your black more vibrant. Then I'm going over this with black, making strokes in line with where my reference photo is darker. Then I'm going over this with my gray to add fur. As you may have noticed, blue and gray are the go-to colors to create a more vibrant black. As you can see, most of the time you will have these strokes around the edges because of the 3D nature and shape of the animals we are drawing. You could also switch up the tones of gray to add more depth. Then I'm starting on the nose. I first block in the darkest areas again. On top of the nose I do the same, but make sure to keep it lighter. Then I add a second layer of black on top of the nose so it becomes more defined. This cute little nose is really light on top, so in order to achieve the same effect, I'm actually blocking the whole top in with a light blue. Don't forget to add this color underneath the nostrils to define those shapes a bit more. In between you can use a darker tone of blue. It's still light, just not as light, so we want to make sure we see the difference. Blend it out and go in for your next layer to define the nostrils some more. We do this by defining the middle with a blue tone and a gray tone for the nostrils itself. And then to really make them stand out, use black above to define this even more. I like to blend it out and repeat this process because the more layers it has, the more realistic your piece will look. So when you look at the nose of the dog, you can see it has these lines, shapes, bumps and cracks on the surface. It's much like our fingerprint, it's unique to each dog. Now in order for us to replicate this, I'm going to use dots. I use a light gray here as these are highlighted areas. Put them on top of the nose and also on the sides, everywhere a dog has these creases. Blend it out a little just to make it a little softer. Then we go in with our black pencil and we add some small lines in between the shapes of the layer underneath. We want to do this in order to define some of the bumps and valleys there, but don't overdo this as you just want to hint this notion instead of making this focused. Then I go over the muzzle and the nose with some light and dark to define these areas some more. It's easier to evaluate this once more of the surrounding colors have been filled in. Just keep a good eye on your reference in order to find these spots. On to the last piece of this drawing. Again, start by blocking in with black, leaving some blank spaces open for your highlights. Blend this all out again, making sure the blank spaces are now covered in a lighter shade of black. And just like we did before, we are going to go in with our darkest colors first. Look at the photo for this, but it makes a lot of sense that we should be applying this under the muzzle and the head to create depth here. Blend it out again. Then the same way we did with the other fur, we are going to put in some highlights in a lighter color here. Don't forget the strokes can be longer because the fur on the body is much longer than on the head. I switched it up here with some light gray and a darker gray. Just follow the direction of the fur and you will be fine. Don't forget I blend it out again here, but that's just because I prefer a softer look. You could also leave it as is, whichever way you prefer. When I looked closely at my reference photo, I could see some purple in the corners, so I added that. And because we only put in a few fur strokes and blend them out again, you can see the color, but it's not as defined, which is exactly what we are going for here. Then finally we can add the whiskers. I used the gray color which blended smoothly into the colors that were already on there. And once I applied them, I also gently smudged them. This is a personal choice, but I like it when I can see the whiskers but they don't jump at you at the same time. It's the same feeling for me as when I look at my own dogs. I can see their whiskers, but it's not the first thing I see. And that's it for today's tutorial. I hope you guys found this one helpful and I hope it also gave you a better understanding as how to build black fur. If it did, remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see all of my upcoming videos. Hit that bell icon if you want to be notified every time I upload a video. See you in the next one, have a great week!